Yeah, I can remember the first time that I jumped off the top diving board at the Sheaf Valley swimming baths in Sheffield. And I was probably about aged 8, I think I was about aged 8. And this feels very similar. This feels like a similar feeling. I was committed to jumping off, I couldn't turn back. And the edge of the diving board was a threshold, and beyond that was a new experience. It was the unknown. And I was reflecting on that last night. Just thinking, well, actually, it's a good metaphor for spiritual death, I think, or an approach to spiritual death. Just this kind of being on the threshold of a new experience. I had lots of those moments at Bodhinaga on the ordination course. And I've begun to cherish those moments, that feeling of just being, the fear and the excitement of just being on the edge of a new experience, on the edge of the unknown. So, today my birth is fruitful, my human life is justified. Today I am born into the family of the Buddha. Now I am the Buddha's son. So those verses of the Bodhicharyavatara by Shantideva were chanted at our public ordination on Monday the 13th of June this year. And I underwent ritual spiritual rebirth along with 15 of my brothers in the Dharma. And I was reborn as Bodhinaga. And I can remember the day of the public ordinations and the evening of my private ordination very vividly. It was a magical time for me. So I'd like to indulge myself just by kind of remembering that time and recollecting it with you. So the private preceptors had arrived a few days earlier, and amid torrential rain, there was thunderstorms and torrential rain in the valley. And it created a tense atmosphere of energy in the Bodhinaga Valley. And this wild weather and the elements combined with the arrival of these great beings, the preceptors, it created this atmosphere of being contained within the valley. And it felt, like it could be an alchemist's cauldron or a chrysalis of transformation. So my preceptor Amoghavangsa and I, we formed an ordination cooler with Satyaraja and Kusalananda. And I've got very fond memories of those 2 weeks. They were two, I think the two happiest weeks of my life so far, those 2 weeks in the ordination cooler. There was a great sense of camaraderie, of shared practice and shared commitment. Each of us were completely committed to Buddha, Dharma and Sangha during those 2 weeks. I experienced a deep sense of satisfaction and happiness during that time, an absence of anything resembling an inner conflict. I'd spent the past 8 weeks preparing intensively for the private ordination and public ordination, but it also felt like the whole of my life had been building up to this moment, to this time. So the private ordination symbolises your willingness to go it alone, if you have to, a commitment to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, even if no one else is going to go for refuge with you. You're prepared to go it alone. And I felt ready for that after the preparation. I felt ready for that. In the couple of weeks leading up to the cooler period, I was experiencing a kind of a joy, a delight during my prostration practice in the morning. I just had this assurance that I knew the Dharma would be alive whilst I was alive, because I was going to be practicing the Dharma. And I also felt, really grateful to Bhante Sangharachita, and I just felt completely assured I was going to be a disciple. I'd always be a disciple of his. So I felt clarity about committing myself to the three jewels. And during that time, there were no conflicts. It felt like all of my energies were united. I experienced a heightened sense of going for refuge as I approached my ordination. And this depth of commitment allowed me to enter a kind of a magical, mythical space for those couple of weeks, where everything seemed to take on a symbolic meaning. So my private ordination was particularly magical and mythic for me. Amoghavangsa had returned from the preceptors' meeting the night before, and he said, we're on for tomorrow. We've got a slot. We've got the last slot between 10 o'clock and midnight. So it was another top of the diving board moment. I had the butterflies, but excitement as well. And about 8 p.m. that day, the four of us entered our makeshift shrine room in one of the Yeso huts. And we began our evening puja. And apparently there was a double rainbow over the ordination stupa as two of my brothers were getting ordained at that time. but however, during the sevenfold puja, I experienced quite a deep anxiety. I decided to take the Amitabha sadhana practice, but on the night of my private ordination, doubts surfaced as to whether actually I should be taking the Shakyamuni practice, or maybe it would be Padmasambhava that I should take. So all this anxiety just came up during the puja, just before my private ordination. So I was in a bit of a mythic space. I decided just to drop the question like a pebble into my depths during the puja. And so I did. I just dropped this question in about my sadhana into my depths. And almost immediately there came back a response of Amitabha. But I thought, well, you know, I'm going to be properly mythic. I'll do it 3 times. So I did it a second and a third time. And each time I just got an immediate response of Amitabha. So I felt confident, and I felt the doubts receded. So then it was time for the private ordination. So I followed the great being Amoghavamsa down to the ordination stupa. Yeah, and it was. I followed him down in silence to begin the ritual, and it reached its climax in the ordination stupa where I was given my new name, Bodhinaga. I'd always been drawn to Amoghavamsa's expression of wisdom in his day-to-day life with his acts of kindness and generosity. But there was a different side to him that I'd not seen before. I witnessed a different side to him in the ordination stupa. He exuded this real power and strength that I don't see very often, and it was awesome. It was awesome to behold. So I'm very grateful to Amoghavamsa for the support and guidance over the years. And particularly I was struck by the name. He's telling me afterwards about the name. I was struck by the care he took in choosing my name, because he chose a name that he knew I would love, because I love the depth and I love the archetype of Nagas and dragons, and he knew I loved that. He wanted a name that the Sheffield Sangha would have meaning for them. He said he wanted to remind the Sheffield Sangha of Bodhi, of awakening, of the purpose of our practice. He said he also chose a name that would be easy for people to say in schools where I work, teaching some Buddhism and meditation. And he chose a name that deepened connections I'd made with Bodhiketu and Bodhidharka at Gukkiloka. And he chose a name that would give me a connection with his old friend, Naga Bodhi, as well. So he thought about it on lots and lots of different levels about the name, and that was very special for me. So the night of my private ordination, the 2 weeks leading up to my private ordination, was a magical and a mythic time for me. And in reflecting and preparing for this talk, one question keeps coming back to me, which was, what was it that died during the ordination? What died during that time? And I was chatting to my Kalyana Mitra, Savanagarbha, and he was reminding me, well, the stage of spiritual death is equivalent to the stage of seeing or seeing through. So another way I've been looking at it is, well, what did I see through at that time? What did I see through during that course at Gukkiloka? And I think the answer to some extent is I saw through my old identity. So the seeds of insight are sown when we begin to see samsara in terms of the 3 lakshanas, and particularly when we start to see more and more the impermanence, the insubstantiality and the unsatisfactoriness of our own self-identity. So in the fires of Gukkiloka, I began to really see through some of the out-of-date views about myself and views that I held about the world. And they dropped away a bit like the old skin of a snake. And one of these was a completely irrational guilt which I was carrying around with me. And Ratnaprabha mentioned yesterday about carrying excess luggage that you don't need. And this felt like I was carrying a big, heavy, massive cow on my back. That's what it felt like, just carrying this irrational guilt around with me all the time. And I had 2 moments of what felt like personal crisis during the Gukkiloka course. And they were top diving board moments. And the first of these was the night before we began our ethics, our confession practice, and on the course. And I was sharing a room with Maitridasa, and I had to bring him out of our silence, our overnight silence, just to confide in him a real panic, a gut-wrenching fear. I'm not going to do it, I told him. I'm not going to do it. This is stupid. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do it. And I was terrified that my brothers would discover that really I was a bad person, and I'd be thrown out of the valley and I would be rejected. And it felt like a life or death situation, actually. It's kind of that view about myself had to die, and I couldn't go into that situation still carrying that view of myself. And it was a terrifying situation, actually. But sure enough, I was able to confess to my brothers, and I wasn't rejected. In fact, they pointed out that most of my breaches were relatively minor, and a huge weight was lifted from my shoulders. And again, it was like the dropping away of an old skin. I left behind my old Catholic way of approaching ethics, just the last remnants, or some of the last remnants of that old way. So there were several other views about myself I saw through during the ordination course, and I continue to discover and see through old views about myself. And I just assumed that would stop at some point, but talking to friends who've been practicing for a long time and hearing the talks already this weekend, well, I'm learning that process is going to go on for quite a long time. So my ordination represented a point of conception, a point between death and rebirth. So a coming together of my going for refuge, my commitment, and reality in the form of the three lakshanas, a conception. And I started to see through the impermanence, the insubstantiality, the unsatisfactoriness of my old identity, and a new being was conceived in the womb of the Gukkiloka Valley. And as I clung less tightly to my old identity, I could see through the barriers I had built out of fear between myself and others. I started to enjoy new, deeper levels of friendship and intimacy. And I particularly experienced this with Maitridasa, whom I shared a room with for 14 of the 16 weeks. And we had a particular phrase that we used, which was, the door was unlocked between us. And that there was nothing we couldn't talk about, nothing was off limits. And I experienced a joy and a sense of relief of deeper communication, sharing things I'd not shared with anyone else before. So at this point, I'd like to make a plug for ethics as a spiritual practice, ethics as a spiritual death and spiritual rebirth practice. And I've been reflecting on this actually. I think it's probably all there in ethics, and people might have different views, but with ethics you're seeing through your old views. You're brought up against your views about yourself, and you can work with that. So there's death involved in the practice of ethics, but you're also creating a new being with your actions in the present moment. Your positive actions, you're creating who you're going to be in the future. So it's a rebirth practice as well. So ethics and confession, I'm just learning more and more, is a real spiritual death and rebirth practice. Yeah, so as I held less tightly to my old identity, new energies began to emerge and unfold. I experienced waves of creative energy, and I started to express this in the form of poetry, or what could loosely be described as poetry. And I won't be sharing any with you this morning, you'll be glad to hear. So I experienced a release of energies, and they included these very creative energies. But not all of the energies that were released felt so pleasant and creative. Around the time of my private ordination, I had a very vivid dream, which was something that happened a lot at Gukkiloka. I'd been keeping a journal of my dreams and looking out for clues from my depths. And during this particular dream, there were two cats trying to get into the front door of my house. One of the cats was my own cat, and I was very happy to let that cat come in. And the other cat was this black cat that didn't belong to me, but it was hanging out with my cat and kept coming in through the front door. And no matter how hard I tried to kind of shoo this cat away and how quickly I tried to close the door, it would always just sneak in, it would always get in. So this dream was me trying to throw this black cat out and then quickly close the door and it'd get back in again. So I woke up and had a sense of what I thought my unconscious might be trying to communicate to me. And in the weeks leading up to my ordination, and even more so afterwards, I began to experience what felt like very powerful destructive energies, which I didn't want and I hadn't asked for. And I had a very strong experience of these energies when I began to practice the Amitabha sadhana for the first few times. What emerged was very different from what I had anticipated, what I'd expected. So I thought I'd assumed that I'd sit down with Amitabha and I'd just experience warmth, metta, compassion. But what I experienced was overpowering rage and fury, which lasted the entire duration of my sadhana. And then when I finished the sadhana, it stopped. And the same thing happened the next day. I sat down to do my sadhana and I experienced this overpowering rage and fury. And then I stopped doing the sadhana and this rage and fury stopped. So I was very shaken up and concerned, as you might imagine. And had there been some kind of mistake? Was I doing something wrong with the sadhana practice? Had I chosen the wrong practice after all? And how could I talk about this? But I plucked up the courage to speak to Satyaraja. I was having a walk with Satyaraja the following day, And he was very clear, he spoke to me in no uncertain terms, said, no, this is a positive this is a positive thing, this is a positive energy. You need this energy. In fact, he said, this is the best bit of you, which took me aback. So, yeah. And during the rest of the course, and since I've returned to Sheffield, I've continued to experience anger and sometimes rage. But this energy is starting to be directed less inwards towards myself and is starting to be expressed in a new way, as a protective energy, with me speaking out to protect what I value. And that's something I wouldn't have dreamed of doing in the past. I'm now I'm finding myself speaking out to protect things that are really important to me. So rebirth has been and continues to be an uncomfortable process. I'm continuing to experience this anger and rage. My new identity isn't what I expected it would be. It's not what I thought it would be. I've signed up for the unknown. That's the nature of the commitment I've made. It's the nature of the commitment that we've all made. We've signed up to the unknown, which is a bit frightening sometimes. Yeah, so that's throwing up all kinds of energies and responses. So I've been back from Gukkiloka for 3 months now. And if Gukkiloka was the womb that I was conceived in, well, it feels like when I returned, it was a bit like I was given birth, I was born into this scary world, and the nurse slapped me in the face to check I was alive. Yeah. So, and I've been asking, well, what has changed since I got back to Sheffield? Has anything changed? What's changed? And my ethical behaviour hasn't magically become skillful overnight, which I naively thought it might do, or had hoped it might do. And I find myself in the same old environment with the same old triggers and acting in the same old ways with the same old patterns of behaviour. So sometimes I ask myself, well, has anything really changed? What has really changed? And I am seeing through a bit more the appeal of things, but I'm still habitually reaching out and grasping after them, which does feel a bit humiliating at times. But despite feeling more and more like a fraud, or the most inappropriate person to be teaching the Dharma or speaking at Padmaloka, I seem to be more effective and to have a positive effect on the people around me. There have been other developments as well. I'm starting to experience a new sense of freedom, a sense that I can act however I want to act, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about it. And that might not sound very radical, but that's a new thing for me. It's a new experience for me. Yeah. So the talk, it's been helpful for me to look back and just reflect, to give this talk about, well, what has changed? What died during the course? What's been reborn? But really, most of what took place and what's happened, I don't really understand, if I'm honest. It took place on a level which I'm not, I'm not really, I don't understand. And that can be, it's like a process that I'm not in control of, and that can be a bit scary as well, actually. Just the, I'm aware stuff is changing, but I don't really know what it is. And there are things I can talk about, and I can talk about the kind of stuff on the surface, but I think it's important to acknowledge I don't really understand what's going on. There was a poem that Maitradasa gave to me in Gukkiloka, which helped to sum this up for me, or to evoke some of this experience. A poem by Bhante. And sometimes with Bhante's poems you get a glimpse of what his inner experience might be like in certain situations. And there's a poem called Above Me Broods. And there's a particular verse that captures this for me. Within me sleep potencies deep, unfathomably deep, which when awake the bonds of life, death, time and space will break. So I really like that verse, just kind of speaking of this, these unfathomably deep potencies. Yeah, I had an amazing time at Gukkiloka, an absolutely amazing time. And in the last few days of the course, I had a conversation with Amalavajra. And I told him that, well, basically I didn't want to leave. At a part of me, at this really deep level, I just had this sense of contentment and satisfaction that I'd never experienced before, and I didn't want to leave. And what I said to him, I realised actually I needed to find out how I could get that back in Sheffield. Now, how can I get this real sense of satisfaction and contentment back in the world? I haven't got the answers, I'm afraid. I don't know. But I did get a similar sense of contentment last weekend in the Padmaloka shrine room at the men's event. There was just in the puja, just a sense of being plugged back into something. Yeah, and sometimes I can close my eyes and I can vividly picture the shrine room at Bodhinaga and where we all sat during the puja and meditation. And it brought to mind, when I was thinking about the talk, some verses from a Bob Dylan song called Bob Dylan's Dream. And I think perhaps Bob Dylan must have been on the Bodhinaga ordination course, because the verses really really evoke the experience for me when I close my eyes and picture my brothers in the Bodhinaga shrine room, wishing that my life could be as simple as it was, with my friends in the Dharma, these 20 great men, high up in a Spanish mountain valley. While riding on a train going west, I fell asleep for to take my rest. I dreamed a dream that made me sad, concerning myself and the first few friends I had. With half-damp eyes I stared to the room, where my friends and I spent many an afternoon, where we together weathered many a storm, laughing and singing till the early hours of the morn. I wish in vain, that we could sit simply in that room again. $10,000 at the drop of a hat. I'd give it all gladly if our lives could be like that. Well, I wish I do see my friends regularly. I've seen some of them this weekend. And I wish that our lives can be like they were out in Spain. And I wish that, well, each of us are able to keep alive the inspiration and the momentum from our ordinations. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you.